Sometimes, the moments that change our lives forever don't come with warning signs. They come in a blink, a spilled drink, a silent camera flash, and suddenly, two strangers from opposite worlds are tangled in a story neither of them ever expected. Before we dive in, take a second to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you enjoy meaningful, emotionally rich storytelling, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead like falling stars. Laughter from the elite mingled with the soft hum of a live string quartet. The gala at the Grand Lion Hotel moved like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. Precise, controlled, flawless. Just the way Eduardo liked it. He was the kind of man who could shake an entire financial empire with a single nod. Tonight, he glided through the ballroom like a silent monarch. Sharp eyes, tailored suit sculpted to perfection. Not a wrinkle out of place, not a single wasted word. And then there was Helena. In a white apron stained with old coffee rings, she weaved through the crowd balancing a tray of cocktails. She didn't belong here. Never had. But life, and her mother's rising medical bills, had forced her into this glittering world, wearing worn-out shoes and carrying dreams trimmed down to survival. Then fate slipped on the polished floor. A collision. A soft gasp. The expensive whiskey soared from her tray and splashed across Eduardo's chest like an insult that stung deeper than words. Amber liquid bled into the silk like a wound. Heads turned, conversations halted. And yet, Eduardo didn't erupt, not then. He simply took Helena by the arm, firm but calm, and led her away from the growing sea of eyes, into a quiet storage room tucked behind the grand hall. A breath of silence. Then, click, a camera flash. No one saw who took it. But someone had captured it perfectly. The billionaire and the waitress, standing far too close, behind closed doors. 2 hours later, the photo exploded online. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire caught behind the curtain, but who is the girl?" What should have been a harmless accident became a national scandal. By sunrise, Helena had already lost her job. And Eduardo, who had always believed he was untouchable, realized that for once, his reputation was no longer his to control. But what no one could predict was this. That single moment, born of spilled whiskey, would set off a chain of lies, choices, and consequences. And in the end, it would force them both to face something far more dangerous than the truth. Themselves. One moment turned their entire lives upside down. Do you think a single photo can destroy someone's future? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to follow the story behind the headlines. Whitestone Global, 51st floor boardroom, the morning after. The morning light that streamed through the tall glass windows was cold and sterile. So different from the soft, flattering glow of last night's chandeliers. Gone were the string quartets and champagne flutes. Now only the hum of an overworked projector and the sound of papers shuffling filled the air. Eduardo sat at the head of the boardroom table, immaculately dressed, yet somehow off. His cufflinks gleamed, his watch ticked in perfect sync, but his posture was too still, too rigid. A man known for commanding rooms without saying a word now found himself staring at the blue-lit screen of his tablet like it was a loaded gun. The headline hit him harder than the markets ever could. Eduardo Whitestone caught in scandal, bathed in whiskey and whispers. Attached was the image, grainy but damning. A moment frozen in digital ink. Helena, wide-eyed, a fraction too close. Eduardo, expression unreadable, yet clearly entangled. Beneath that image, 3 million views and climbing. And the merger, his 2-year effort to bring in a crucial Asian tech conglomerate, was now officially in jeopardy. He tapped the screen off, sat back. Silence. Across the long table, Helena sat like she didn't belong, which was accurate because she didn't. Not here. Not in this skyline tower of glass and strategy. The borrowed dress she wore fit her awkwardly, tailored for someone else's world. Her hair was pulled back neatly, but hastily. And though Eduardo's assistant had applied soft makeup, it couldn't cover the unease in her eyes. Her hands were wrapped around a porcelain teacup that she hadn't touched, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. The silence stretched between them like a thread straining to snap. Eduardo's voice broke it. Calm, low, businesslike. There's a dinner tonight, with our merger partners. They're uneasy. Helena blinked slowly, unsure why he was speaking to her. I need stability, he continued. A personal image that contradicts the gossip. A grounded man. A committed man. Then, bluntly, I need a wife. Her eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? Eduardo didn't blink. Just for one night? Just for them? In public? You and I, married, on paper, for the cameras? Then it's over. Helena let out a laugh. Sharp, incredulous. You want me to pretend to be your wife, after all this? She gestured vaguely, at the building, at the suit he wore, at the absurdity of it all. You think I can just slap on a fake smile and play along? Like this is some kind of reality show? He met her stare. No condescension, no sarcasm, just quiet resolve. Yes. A pause. Then he added, voice softer. Because I'll pay for your mother's treatment, all of it, and I'll arrange work for you after. Real work, better than carrying trays. Helena's throat tightened. Her fingers loosened around the teacup. He wasn't wrong. The hospital bills had piled up like ghosts on her kitchen table, unpaid, unforgiving. She'd skipped meals to cover rent, skipped sleep trying to find shifts, and now, this man, this untouchable billionaire who somehow became the epicenter of her shame, was offering a solution. One day. Just one day. Helena looked out the window behind him. The city stretched far beneath them, cars like ants, lives like dots. She felt very small and very tired. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but steady. Fine. Eduardo leaned forward. We'll arrange the press. Stylists. My team will coach you on basic background. We won't need to... She cut him off. You don't touch me. Her eyes locked on his. Not even an inch outside the camera's view. A beat passed, then another. Eduardo gave a single nod. Understood. They shook hands. It was a cold handshake, mechanical, as transactional as the contracts he signed every day. But underneath it, beneath the cool palms and the brief eye contact, something less definable stirred. Not trust, not even curiosity, but a shared understanding that from this moment on, they were stepping onto a tightrope, together, and neither one of them had any idea just how far the fall would be. If you've lived through something like this, share it in the comments, and hit subscribe to see where this complicated deal leads. The ballroom of the Arcadia Grand was dressed like a dream spun from old money and modern ambition. The chandeliers gleamed like captured constellations, casting soft golden light across tables dressed in ivory linens and crystal. The air buzzed with the clinking of glasses, practiced laughter, and the faint hum of a live jazz trio tucked discreetly in a corner. And yet, amid the glitter and polish of a world meticulously curated, the center of attention was someone entirely unexpected. Helena. She stood at Eduardo's side, her presence unmistakably different from the other women in the room. No designer logo screamed from her clutch, no calculated tilt of her head signaled social training. She wore a borrowed dress, tastefully elegant, a shade of dusk blue that made her skin glow softly under the chandeliers. Her makeup was subtle, almost accidental. And her smile, that was the most disarming of all. It didn't ask for approval. It offered honesty. Eduardo watched from just a breath away. She laughed gently at something the chairman's wife said, nodded thoughtfully at a junior executive's nervous rambling, and complimented an older investor on the hand-painted pocket square his daughter had made. There was no script, no rehearsal, just instinct, kindness, curiosity. And the room, filled with people who had long learned to fake interest, began to lean toward her light. Eduardo was a man who had always understood leverage, influence. He could sense the room shift with every market swing, every carefully delivered line. But tonight, for the first time, he didn't feel like the master of the game. He felt like a spectator. He'd expected Helena to stay quiet, reserved, maybe awkwardly agreeable. She was a waitress, after all. This wasn't her world. But somehow she didn't just hold her own. She elevated the evening. The contrast between her natural grace and the polished artifice around them made her magnetic. And Eduardo couldn't stop watching. He should have felt triumphant. The charade was working. The investors were charmed. The questions about the scandal had died down. And his image, for the moment, was being redeemed. But he didn't feel victorious. He felt shaken. Because when Helena laughed at something he said, really laughed, not because she was playing a part, but because she found him genuinely amusing, it felt too right, too dangerous. And when she turned to him, eyes bright, and whispered a small inside joke only the two of them could understand, something shifted. It was no longer just a performance. They were slipping. He was slipping. After the speeches, while the crowd drifted towards dessert and espresso, Eduardo excused himself to the balcony. The night air was crisp, grounding. He needed to breathe, but she followed. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. She didn't touch him, didn't need to. Her presence filled the quiet like music. He nodded, but didn't answer. She moved beside him, staring out at the skyline. "This city feels different from up here," she murmured. "Less loud, like it finally stops pretending." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not a waitress, not a problem he needed to solve, but a woman who had walked into his world without armor and survived anyway. And suddenly, Eduardo didn't care about board meetings or market stability. All he could think about was how he was supposed to end this tomorrow, how he was supposed to walk away from a lie that no longer felt like one. She turned to him, smiling, a little sad. "You forget sometimes, don't you, that we're just pretending?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, because he had forgotten, and that terrified him more than any scandal ever could. At first, their nights were wordless, the penthouse, gleaming, cold, and perched high above the restless pulse of the city, offered no comfort. Its marble floors echoed with each footstep, its designer furniture too perfect to touch. It wasn't a home. It was a museum of power, and Helena had entered it as a reluctant exhibit. The arrangement was simple on paper. Two strangers pretending to be husband and wife, sharing space, smiling in public, remaining distant in private. But paper never accounted for human breath, sleepless hours, and the quiet ache that settles in when two people are forced into proximity. It began with small things. Eduardo, the man the world only knew in headlines, no longer filled a room with dominance. He lingered at windows, sometimes late into the night, staring down at the city he once ruled with ease. His shoulders, always squared in boardrooms, now slumped slightly as if bearing a weight unseen. He didn't talk much, but when he did, Helena noticed something unexpected. Restraint. Not the polished control of a public figure, but the careful pause of a man who feared saying something real. She caught him once, just once, reaching for a framed photo on the bookshelf. A child, a woman, a memory. He quickly put it back when he realized she'd seen him, but not before she noticed the expression on his face. Not grief, not longing. Guilt. Helena, too, was changing. Gone was the defiant girl who signed the deal with clenched fists and held her dignity like a blade. In the evenings, she moved more slowly, not out of fear, but exhaustion. Her eyes, once guarded, softened just slightly when Eduardo offered her a cup of tea instead of a command. There was a night, late and unremarkable, when the dam first cracked. She found him sitting on the kitchen floor, barefoot, back against the fridge, a bottle of whiskey by his side, untouched. The lights were off, save for the faint glow from the stovetop. He didn't notice her at first. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice gentle, not accusing. He looked up. And for the first time since they met, Eduardo didn't wear a mask. Not the businessman's arrogance, not the playboy's charm. Just raw, quiet honesty. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know who I am when I'm not performing." That confession hung in the air longer than any silence between them. Helena sat beside him, knees pulled to her chest. No speech, no advice, just presence. In the days that followed, walls began to crumble. They talked more. At first about safe things, coffee preferences, books they never finished, awkward childhood memories. But then deeper things surfaced. His strained relationship with his father, her years of shouldering responsibility alone after her family fell apart. Eduardo confessed he hadn't slept properly in years. Helena shared that she still flinched at sudden phone calls, afraid it would be the hospital again. These weren't dramatic revelations. They were quiet, accidental truths, shared over burned toast, a shared blanket during a thunderstorm, a lingering glance across the hallway. For the first time, the act didn't feel like an act, and that terrified them both. He began noticing her laugh. Not the polite one she wore in front of investors, but the real one that slipped out when she read something ridiculous in a magazine. She began noticing how he apologized. Not with words, but with actions. Washing her dishes, turning off lights, silently leaving an umbrella by the door when it rained. Something unspoken was blooming between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. The aching, dangerous kind. The kind that makes you wonder what it would be like to be truly seen. And in the stillness between staged smiles and rehearsed appearances, they both understood. The real danger wasn't in being caught pretending. It was in the terrifying possibility that this might become real. The storm outside had calmed to a whisper, but inside Eduardo Whitestone's penthouse, another storm was quietly brewing, one no lightning could rival. Helena stood barefoot in the dim kitchen, a cup of untouched tea cooling in her hands. The penthouse, usually so sterile and still, seemed to hum tonight with something unspoken. She hadn't intended to snoop. But after another stiff dinner filled with silence and subtle tension, she needed answers. To something. Anything. That's when she noticed the leather-bound folder left half shut on the kitchen island. No label, no lock, just left there, as if waiting. She opened it absently at first. Line graphs, executive summaries, corporate jargon she barely understood. But then she saw it. Drexler Holdings. And just beneath it, typed in sharp professional font, 2015 Acquisition Windmere Family Trust, full asset transfer, liquidation complete. The words blurred. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Windmere. She hadn't said that name out loud in years. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, That one evening at the dinner table when he quietly removed his watch and laid it beside an unpaid mortgage notice. "We lost it all, Pumpkin. I'm sorry." Windermere had been their home, their livelihood, their identity. Its loss had unraveled her mother's health, her father's confidence, and Helena's future. She'd gone from a college-bound dreamer to a waitress overnight. And now, the man who sat across from her each morning, the one she pretended to be married to, had bought it. Or at the very least, profited from its demise. The folder slipped from her hands. Pages scattered like wounded birds across the marble floor. She didn't knock. Her feet moved before her thoughts could stop them. Down the hallway, past the silent paintings and recessed lighting, she flung open his bedroom door. Eduardo was awake, seated on the edge of his bed in a gray t-shirt and slacks. No silk robe tonight, no armor. Just a man who looked as if he hadn't slept in days. The soft light from the hallway backlit Helena's figure, making her look taller, more formidable than she felt. She held the folder against her chest like a shield. "Windermere," she said. "You knew." He didn't pretend not to understand. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply exhaled, as if the moment had finally arrived. "Yes," he said. "I knew." Helena's voice cracked. "And you didn't think that might matter to me?" Eduardo stood slowly, hands at his sides, unarmed. "It did. I tried to stop it. I was outvoted. I wasn't the CEO then. But you still took the corner office. You still climbed over the ashes." "I didn't want that deal," he said quietly. "But once it was done, there was no undoing it. I told myself I couldn't afford to look back." Helena laughed bitterly. "How convenient for you. My family lost everything, and you gained a promotion." He looked at her, not with defensiveness, not even shame, just tired honesty. "I've lived with it," Eduardo said. "I saw the damage. I buried it. I did what people like me are trained to do." Helena's grip on the folder loosened. "You buried me," she whispered. "You buried my father, my mother, every dream we had." He stepped forward, carefully. "I never meant to hurt you. If I could go back—" "But you can't," she cut in. Her eyes were glassy, her jaw tight. "And now I'm here, in your apartment, in your lie, pretending to be someone I'm not, while the truth is rotting in your files." They stood in silence, not as co-conspirators, not as fake lovers, but as two people linked by a past neither chose, and a future neither could now avoid. She left before he could speak again, and Eduardo, still holding the air between them, sat back down on the bed. The storm outside might have ended, but the one between them had just begun. What if the one you love is the reason your family lost everything? Could you forgive? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to see how they face the truth, subscribe now. The ballroom at the Carlton Avenue Hotel sparkled under crystal chandeliers, each beam of light bouncing off polished glasses and sequined dresses like stars caught in motion. The tables were lined with investors, powerful men and women with sharp suits, sharper minds, and no tolerance for uncertainty. And at the center of it all sat Eduardo Whitestone, the man they had trusted with millions. Beside him, Helena looked every bit the perfect partner. Dressed in a slate blue gown that skimmed her figure with graceful restraint, her hair swept into a soft knot, she carried an air of poised simplicity that set her apart from the artifice surrounding her. But beneath that elegance was a storm of nerves. Her smile was steady, but her fingers trembled lightly under the tablecloth. The dinner had gone smoothly. Too smoothly. Toasts were made, numbers exchanged, promises hinted. Until a casual question, seemingly harmless, cut through the room like a knife. "So how did you two meet?" asked Mr. Tanaka, a senior investor from Tokyo, swirling his wine with a curious smile. The table fell into expectant silence. Eduardo's throat went dry. His mind scrambled for a version of the truth that wouldn't explode. But the silence grew heavier with every heartbeat. Then Helena spoke. Her voice was soft but confident. In a bookstore. A few surprised smiles flickered. She continued, weaving a delicate fiction. He was arguing with the clerk about a rare edition of Hemingway. I happened to have the same book in my bag. We struck up a conversation, and here we are. She smiled, modestly, with just the right amount of warmth. A few people chuckled approvingly. Someone lifted their glass. Crisis averted. But Eduardo couldn't breathe. As the dinner dragged on, he watched Helena laugh at jokes she didn't find funny, nod politely at people who didn't see her. And something inside him cracked. She was performing this lie for him, for his sake, and it was killing her piece by piece. The next morning, Eduardo stood behind a podium in a packed press room. Cameras flashed like lightning. The air was thick with anticipation. This was not a corporate presentation. This was confession. He wore no tie, no pocket square, just a simple suit and eyes that had seen enough. I owe you the truth, he began. The room stilled. The woman you know as my wife, Helena, is not. We are not married. We entered an arrangement to present a stable image for business purposes. It was wrong. Gasps. Pens scratched paper. The internet exploded. But more than that, he continued, voice steady but thick. I made choices in my past that hurt people. One of them was Helena. Years ago, my company profited from a decision that destroyed her family's legacy. I didn't stop it. I buried it. He looked into the cameras. I am not asking for forgiveness, but I will not let her carry the weight of my mistakes. This is mine to bear. He stepped down from the podium as chaos erupted. Elsewhere, in a quiet corner of the city, Helena sat on the edge of a borrowed bed in a borrowed apartment, watching the press conference unfold on a small TV. Tears didn't fall. She was too stunned for that. But her chest ached, not from betrayal, but from something far more dangerous, the possibility that the man she thought she understood had just done something real, something brave. The lie had broken, and through the wreckage, something true had begun to breathe. The truth is finally out, for the whole world to see. But is that enough to heal what's been broken? Should Helena forgive? Drop your opinion below and subscribe to see if honesty can truly redeem them. The city no longer looked at Eduardo Whitestone the same way. The doors that once opened effortlessly at his presence now hesitated, no longer out of respect, but out of caution. Greetings turned into quiet nods. But what unsettled Eduardo most wasn't the world outside going quiet. It was the silence inside himself finally being heard. For the first time in his life, Eduardo didn't go to the office. Not because he was traveling, not because he was planning a billion-dollar merger, but because he had resigned. No press release, no grand exit. Just a handwritten note left on the boardroom table that read, I'm stepping down to learn how to be human. He began by sitting still. Not in the leather chair of the CEO suite, but on the cold stone steps of his penthouse terrace, the same place Helena used to sit during sleepless nights, cradling a cup of cold tea and staring into the city lights, like they might answer her. He waited, not for forgiveness, not for conversation. He just wanted to listen. To Helena. And for the first time, really listen to the quiet voice inside him that had been drowned out by years of power, ambition, and noise. When Helena finally stepped out onto the terrace, she found him fixing the old wooden bench she once mentioned hurt her back. He didn't look up. She didn't say anything. but their eyes met. And for the first time, there was no hostility. Only silence. A fragile, unspoken peace. The next morning, Eduardo left something on the kitchen counter. A small, unmarked wooden box. No lock, no label. Inside, a hard drive. And next to it, a single folder labeled in his own handwriting. Windmere Restoration, unsubmitted draft. It wasn't part of any PR move. He hadn't told anyone on his team. But from the moment he learned the truth, he'd started building something. Something for her family's legacy, for the place that had been torn from her past. Not to win her back, not even to earn her forgiveness, but to do what should have been done a long time ago. There were no justifications inside the folder. No clever spin. Just plans, maps, budgets, quiet, focused work. And that's what stopped her cold. He wasn't saying, "I'm sorry," anymore. He was living it. In the days that followed, Eduardo left the apartment every morning, on foot. No car, no driver, no assistant. He walked to the public library, borrowed books on community redevelopment, local business cooperatives, and economic repair. He started meeting people he used to overlook. The neighborhood coordinator who lost her job after the buyout, the gardener who was fired to cut costs, even the Windmere local councilman who never got a reply to his letters. Eduardo didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked, "How can I help without causing more harm?" And it was that question, quiet, humble, unrecited in public, that made Helena start to believe this man might finally be becoming the person he was supposed to be. No more contracts, no more roles, just two people. One learning how to make things right, and the other slowly unlocking a door she had sworn would stay closed. There were no headlines now, no paparazzi, no staged dinners or public performances. The penthouse had grown quiet, almost sacred. The echo of high heels across the marble had been replaced by the gentle sound of bare feet, by the occasional clink of teacups, by conversations that no longer needed to be rehearsed. Days passed like pages in a journal no one intended to write. They woke at different hours, often passing each other in the kitchen with soft smiles and unspoken ease. There was no script anymore, just silence that didn't feel heavy, and words that came only when they mattered. It began with Eduardo, slowly, cautiously, letting his walls crack. He spoke one evening, not over dinner, but while fixing a loose cabinet handle in the kitchen. His voice barely rose above the hum of the city outside. He talked about his father, the one who disappeared without a note, without explanation, leaving a young Eduardo to make sense of abandonment with nothing but silence and ambition. The boy who learned that success was the only armor that didn't fail. He hadn't spoken of it before, not to friends, not to colleagues, maybe not even to himself. Helena listened. No interruptions, just steady, open eyes, and a hand that rested lightly on the counter near his. Later that same night, it was her turn. She told him about the hospital hallway where she once sat alone for 8 hours, waiting for a doctor to say if her mother would live through the night. About the way poverty didn't just take things, but took time, dignity, choice. About the version of herself she used to be, the girl who dreamed of art school and rooftop apartments, and how that version had quietly packed up and left when the bills arrived. They didn't touch. Not yet. But something passed between them in those stories, something wordless. Trust, maybe, or the faint beginnings of it. Days became weeks. They learned the small details of each other's lives, the way Helena hummed without realizing it when she cooked, the way Eduardo needed a specific pen to sign anything, not out of vanity, but ritual. These things weren't dramatic, but they were real. And one rainy evening, as they stood by the window watching the city blur in silver streaks, Eduardo reached into his pocket. No grand speech, no audience, just the steady thrum of rain and the pulse of a man finally unguarded. The ring was simple. Silver, modest, chosen without a jeweler's advice. His voice trembled just enough to be honest. Not because of obligation, not because of guilt, but because somewhere along this mess, I stopped pretending. Helena didn't answer right away. Her eyes fell to the ring, then rose slowly to meet his. There were no tears, no orchestral music rising in the background. Only her whisper, "Then neither will I." And in that moment, without lights, without roles, they said yes to something neither of them had planned. Not a deal, not redemption, but love, real, unscripted, and theirs. There were no chandeliers, no press, no designer gowns flown in from Paris. When Helena and Eduardo exchanged vows, it wasn't on the cover of a magazine. It was in the garden behind a local community center, beneath a modest arch wrapped in ivy and white string lights. The guests were few. A handful of old neighbors, the cook from Helena's former diner, Eduardo's former driver, and a retired schoolteacher who once told Helena, "Don't let the world shrink you." The ceremony lasted only 20 minutes. No dramatic declarations, just promises spoken in soft, unwavering voices. Promises not just to each other, but to something greater. After the cake was cut and the folding chairs stacked, Helena and Eduardo didn't board a plane for a honeymoon. They went back to the city, back to the heart of where everything began, and where something new would be built. It was Helena's idea first. She said it with quiet conviction as they walked through a neighborhood lined with shuttered shops and for lease signs. My father didn't lose just a business. He lost his sense of worth. What if we could help people like him? Hold on? Eduardo didn't blink. He didn't ask for a proposal deck or a feasibility study. He just nodded. Weeks later, the paperwork was signed. The Windmere Initiative. A nonprofit venture aimed at offering microloans, mentorship, and legal resources to small family-owned businesses, particularly those in underserved communities. Its mission was clear: to preserve the kind of dreams Helena's family had once lost, and the kind of futures Eduardo's world had too often overlooked. At the launch event, Helena stood behind the podium. This time, not as anyone's +1 or fabricated spouse, but as co-founder. She spoke not like a public figure, but like a woman who had survived the breaking and chose to build something stronger in its place. "This is not charity," she said. "It's restoration. It's a reminder that value doesn't come from market shares or last names, but from dignity, from effort, from hope." Eduardo, watching from the side of the stage, didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The applause said everything. From that day on, the two of them weren't just bound by affection, but by purpose. He brought strategy. She brought soul. Together they brought balance to a mission that neither could have accomplished alone. They still had coffee in the mornings, still disagreed over office furniture colors, still took walks without bodyguards. Their love remained quiet, but fierce. Because what they shared now wasn't built on drama or chance, it was built on choice, on a decision to turn pain into action and love into something that served others. And in that choice, they found not only each other, but something far greater: a legacy. It happened on a quiet morning, the kind where the city hadn't yet found its rhythm. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, dust motes dancing like small miracles in the still air. The coffee hadn't finished brewing. The world hadn't yet knocked on their door. Helena sat beside Eduardo on the edge of the bed, barefoot, in one of his old button-down shirts. No grand announcement, no rehearsed words, just a small, trembling smile and a quiet gesture. She took his hand, calloused and once cold, and placed it gently over her belly. For a moment he said nothing. Didn't need to. Because something shifted behind his eyes, something deep, sacred, and immediate. The kind of understanding that bypasses language and goes straight to the soul. A new life was growing inside her. A life born not from perfect planning or fairy tale promises, but from honesty, healing, and the kind of love you only find after the wreckage has cleared. In the months that followed, Eduardo did something no one expected from a man once known for skyscrapers and shareholder meetings. He slowed down. He listened more, smiled easier, and he built something not made of steel and glass this time, but of intention. A community center. Not downtown, not flashy, but nestled in a neighborhood too long forgotten. He named it simply Helena. It wasn't a vanity project. There were no gold plaques, no opening galas, just doors that stayed open late, classrooms filled with light, and counselors who listened more than they spoke. There were job training programs for single mothers, grief groups for those rebuilding, a lending library, a kitchen, a garden. It became a place where people came not to forget their pain, but to plant something new in it. And every now and then, Eduardo would sit on a bench outside, a notebook in his lap, watching a teenager laugh again for the first time in weeks, or a widower find purpose in teaching others to bake. He no longer needed to prove anything, because in that center, named for the woman who taught him how to love without armor, he found redemption not through grand gestures but daily choices. And Helena? She continued to live softly, but with strength, her steps grounded in empathy, her voice steady. When their baby was born, a girl with Helena's eyes and Eduardo's quiet fire, they named her Grace, not because life had been easy, but because it had been worth it. Their story, once a headline scandal, became something else entirely. A whispered legend in the community, a reminder that from broken beginnings, whole lives can bloom. And as the seasons turned and the ivy grew along the bricks of the community center, one truth remained etched deeper than any blueprint. Sometimes, the most beautiful homes are built from what was once shattered. And sometimes, the greatest love stories are the ones you never meant to write. So, what did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 1 to 10, and let me know why you gave it that score. Was there a moment that stood out to you? Or maybe it reminded you of something from your own life? If this story moved you, touched your heart, or simply made you think, go ahead and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. We've got more stories coming your way, and I'd love to have you along for the journey.